Crew. So today back with another story. I know it's been a while since my last upload, I think just under a week. I am trying to get back to a regular schedule. I've just been pretty busy lately. If you are enjoying the channel so far, please like and subscribe and just show some support to the channel. The more support and the bigger this channel can grow, the more time I can dedicate to upload and find new stories. So today's story is called The Red Eye Rail Line. I love riding the subway, but I'm not a big fan of paying for the privilege. If you're quick, it's not too hard to hop the turnstile. Maybe some folks notice you, maybe not. The key is always act natural. Act like you belong. The same attitude helps if you find yourself in an uncomfortable spot on the subway. I did my best to keep that in mind when I hopped into a crowded train full of monsters. At first, I figured I'd stumbled upon some group of Halloween outing. It was 3:03 am on a cold morning in October. I didn't have any particular place to be, so I decided to ride the rails and take the first train to pull up. There's nothing weird about the cars from the outside, but the moment I stepped through the doors, it was like walking into a fever dream. Men and women stood shoulder to shoulder, dressed in rags, wearing black-white masks. They all turned and looked at me as I entered. My first inclination was to stop and step back, leave the subway, and go and hide under my bed, back in my apartment. The trouble was, I couldn't get my feet to move. The scene in front of me was just too surreal. I was only frozen for a few seconds, but it was long enough that I heard the hiss of the doors closing behind me. The lurch of the subway moving forward almost caused me to stumble. 20 or so masked faces followed me as I walked through the car. I mean, it was October. The obvious explanation for the metro full of weirdos was something to do with Halloween. I told myself it was all benign, if cringy. Fun? So, why did I feel like a rabbit who just stumbled into a fox convention? The next car was blessedly empty. It was bright, clean, no signs of the unusual marker graffiti or USOVV, unidentified stains of various vicinity. I released a deep breath. I didn't realize I was holding and sat down. The cushion was lumpy and brilliant shade of burnt mustard, but I was already feeling more at ease. My plan was to ride to the next stop and hop off, then do some night walking, maybe hunt for street tacos once it got closer to dawn. I stretched out and looked out the window to watch the tunnel lights flicker past. Something bumped my leg. I looked over at the seat next to me, the one against the window. There was a dent in the middle, and the cushion as if somebody is sitting down. As I watched, the impression shifted. My throat closed up. I glanced at the other seat and saw the same dimples in many of them. I stood up slowly and began walking down the aisle, weaving between the poles. When I passed by a row of seats, the dents disappeared. I heard the unmistakable sound of a throat clearing. Not unusual, the most alarming noise, but coming from an empty subway car, it put a little extra energy in my step. I tripped over something in the aisle and had to catch myself on the back of a seat. "Watch it," something said. I mumbled an apology and kept moving. When I reached the door to the next car, I turned back. None of the seats were indented. Either I had hallucinated the whole thing, and there was never anybody in the space with me, or they were all standing up. I backed through the door. The next car also appeared empty. It was dimmer than any previous car, lights filtering on and off like fireflies. There was a smell. Christ, there was a smell. It was like spoiled milk and cinnamon with a dash of cleaning solution, what they use in hospitals. Music began to play as I walked through the car. Something twinkling jazz, all piano and brass. The music wasn't awful exactly, but it was far from pleasant. The musicians kept missing notes and losing their tempo, rushing, then dragging, then rushing again to catch up. I didn't want to spend the rest of my, hopefully, short trip listening to this racket and gagging on the smell. So I hurried along. The temperature dropped the further I got into the car. First, it was brisk, then chilly, then my breath started rolling out in little clouds. I was shivering by the time I reached the midway point. The windows of the car were fogged up, making the space feel even darker and more claustrophobic. Even worse, both the odour and the music were ramping up with each step. By the time I reached the door, I was fighting down an urge to vomit. Hands tight over my ears, my entire body shaking so hard, I expected the change to fall out of my pockets. I opened the door leading to the next car and froze. It was pitch black inside the cabin, an almost crash of inky dark. Fuck, I muttered hesitantly. The music continued to rise as I stood between the cars, and now there was no rhythm at all, only a jarring, snapping shriek of noise that damned needed. I ran into the next car and slammed the door behind me. Silence, perfect, beautiful, quiet. I sighed and sank down to the floor. There was a squish, and I jumped up. My hands were covered in cold, oily fluid. Everywhere I'd sunk down was soaked in it. It smelled like wax and something sharper I couldn't identify. Fuck, I said, trying to shake some of the gunk off. Who are you? A voice asked from the dark. I opened my mouth, not sure if I should reply. Who is that? Another voice asked. You don't look familiar. Speak up, the first voice added. You can talk, right? I cleared my throat. Sorry? Voices bubbled up in the blackness. You're not supposed to be here. Stowaway. Not welcome, not welcome. Leave, leave, leave. I obliged, sprinting down the aisle to the next car. I tripped over something heavy and wet, but bounced back immediately, crashing through the door to a new compartment. To my absolute horror, the car was well lit. Monsters stared at me, twisted things with animals' eyes, and open wounds and antlers, horns, sagging bellies, dragging on the floor. One woman sat nearby, normal, except for the split torso, revealing a cluster of beating hearts. Another man-shaped creature sighed, his mouth taking up all of his face except for empty sockets, weeping a clear fluid. You're not supposed to be here. I looked for the speaker and saw an old man in even older conductor uniform. The blue in his jacket was so faded it was nearly grey. He seemed human, other than a series of jagged lines running across his face, and hands, like hairline cracks in glass. "Do you have a ticket?" the conductor asked, heading towards me. "I really hope you have a ticket." My eyes darted around the car and landed on a small metal panel on the side of the train. I figured that, flickering like static, sat next to the panel. Jaw clenched, I dove for it. An alarm sounded. When I opened the container, there was a slim red lever inside. Even if nothing else about the train was normal, it was nice to see that it still had an emergency brake. I pulled the lever. The creatures roared and shrieked and tumbled as the subway jerked to a stop. Hands and tentacles grasped at me as I made my run for the door, which was opening so fucking slow. I felt a tug on my jacket. Just as I was about to cross, I slithered out of the garment and fell onto the platform. "You shouldn't have done that." I turned to see the conductor standing in the doorway, in a denim jacket, dangling from his hand. He looked down at the platform. I got a strange feeling that he wanted very much to step off the train but couldn't, or perhaps was too afraid. The conductor met my eye, and I sucked in a breath at the contempt I saw stitched across his face. "I'll be seeing you, stowaway," the thing promised as the doors closed. I sat there on the cold concrete of the platform until the nightmare train pulled out of the station. From now, I'll be taking the bus. So I hope you like that story, guys. If you did, please leave a comment and subscribe to the channel, and I will be getting more stories up soon.